The thinkers who came before us were already asking the same questions that haunt us today. If this dialogue with the past also makes sense to you, consider liking and subscribing. This way, we keep alive ideas that have crossed centuries and still have much to say.
You don't feel anxious because life is too fast. You feel anxious because your desires are. Every day you wake up already running, not from danger, but from emptiness. You want peace, but you also want more success, more validation, more proof that you're doing fine. And somehow, the more you get, the less it feels like enough. That's not random. That's the structure of modern anxiety, built on a cycle of wanting, chasing, and collapsing again. You think you're tired from work, but you're tired from desire. 2,000 years ago, a man named Epicurus already saw this coming. He said, "It's not what you have that makes you suffer, it's what you think you need." Epicurus wasn't preaching abstinence. He wasn't against pleasure. He just understood that pleasure without clarity becomes poison. He believed our pain begins the moment we want the wrong things, when we confuse what feels urgent with what's truly necessary. This video isn't about ancient philosophy. It's about your life, your anxiety, and the map Epicurus left for both. Because if you understand what he discovered about desire, you'll start to see your anxiety differently, not as a curse, but as a signal that your mind is chasing what your soul no longer wants. Epicurus didn't tell us to stop desiring. He told us to desire wisely. When you hear the name Epicurus, what comes to mind? Pleasure. Hedonism, a man obsessed with comfort and excess. But that image is a lie, a distortion repeated for centuries by those who never read his words, only feared their implications. Because if people truly understood what he meant by pleasure, the entire system of desire that keeps society running would collapse. Epicurus never built palaces. He lived in a small garden on the outskirts of Athens, surrounded by ordinary people, slaves, women, outcasts, the ones philosophy had always ignored. They shared simple meals, bread, olives, a bit of cheese, sometimes wine, but never too much. He believed the richest person is not the one who owns the most, but the one who needs the least. For him, pleasure was not a rush, it was relief. The quiet after hunger is satisfied. The peace that comes when fear stops whispering in your mind. The stillness of a body and soul that finally say, enough. But humanity never liked enough. We wanted more. And we turned a philosophy of simplicity into a religion of stimulation. When Epicurus said pleasure, he meant freedom from craving. When modern culture says pleasure, it means craving without end. The difference is not small. It's the difference between peace and torment, between calm satisfaction and the restless need for something else. We renamed anxiety as ambition. We glorified excess and called it happiness. And somewhere along the way, we convinced ourselves that the absence of desire means the absence of life. But Epicurus saw that illusion clearly. He understood that most suffering comes not from what happens to us, but from what we think needs to happen. Imagine this. You work harder, buy more, scroll longer. Each achievement gives a spark of pleasure, a chemical hit that fades almost instantly. And when it fades, you're left emptier than before. That's not pleasure. That's dependency. It's the same loop Epicurus warned against 2,300 years ago. Because if your peace depends on what you get, you'll never have enough. And if your identity depends on what you desire, you'll never be free. Epicurus was never teaching indulgence. He was teaching clarity, a radical understanding of desire as something that could heal you or destroy you. He called for moderation not as morality, but as medicine. Because a person who doesn't understand their desires is a slave who thinks he's free. So while history mocked him as a hedonist, Epicurus was actually describing liberation, not from pain, but from the illusion that pain can be cured by more pleasure. And that misunderstanding, that reversal of meaning, is what built the anxious, addicted, endlessly unsatisfied modern world.
Epicurus believed that all human suffering comes down to one thing: not knowing what kind of desire is moving you. He said there are 3 kinds, and until you learn to tell them apart, you'll live like a puppet pulled by invisible strings. And here's the twist: most people are ruled by the wrong ones. So let's break them down. And as you listen, notice which ones quietly rule you. The first kind is natural and necessary desires. Things your body truly needs to live: food, warmth, safety, friendship. When these desires are fulfilled, you feel peace. You don't crave, you simply rest. They bring satisfaction because they have an end point. Hunger ends when you eat. Loneliness fades when you're seen. These are the desires of nature: calm, grounded, real. Epicurus said, feed them, but never let them grow wild. Because once they cross the line, they become something else. The second kind is natural but unnecessary desires, still connected to nature, but already infected with preference. You don't want just food, you want better food. Not just comfort, but a particular brand, a specific image, the curated version of peace. They're not evil, but they're fragile. They turn satisfaction into performance. They make you compare what you have with what someone else has, and from that comparison, anxiety is born. Epicurus warned that those desires whisper louder than any voice of reason, because they sound innocent, and that's what makes them dangerous. And then there's the third kind, vain and empty desires. These are the ones society plants in your head: fame, status, infinite wealth, the illusion of control. They can never be satisfied because they don't end in the body, they end in fantasy. And fantasies don't die, they just mutate. You get the thing you wanted, and 5 minutes later, your mind invents a new one. Sound familiar? That's not an accident. Our entire economy runs on those empty desires. If people ever learned to stop chasing them, the system would collapse overnight. And here's the part most people miss. Epicurus didn't say those desires were immoral. He said they were impossible. You can't fulfill them because they were designed to never end. So now ask yourself, which desires rule your mind? Are you feeding what's natural, or are you addicted to what's hollow? And here's the thing, the difference is not philosophical, it's neurological. Your brain treats a like, a raise, or a new purchase as survival signals. You're chasing dopamine, not meaning. But don't worry, this isn't about rejecting the world or renouncing pleasure. Epicurus never said, don't desire. He said, understand what you're desiring and why. Because once you see the pattern, you stop being its prisoner. And here's where it gets really interesting. Because if the third type of desire creates endless anxiety, how do you escape it when the modern world is built to keep you craving? The answer is not what you think. And in the next part, you'll see why true peace has nothing to do with comfort and everything to do with courage.
Epicurus warned that vain desires are the root of human misery. But what he couldn't have imagined is that one day, entire empires would be built to manufacture them. Welcome to the machinery of modern anxiety. Every time you unlock your phone, you step into a marketplace of longing. Algorithms don't sell products, they sell desires. They study what triggers your craving and feed it back to you until you mistake it for truth. It's not manipulation in the old sense, it's emotional engineering. The modern world doesn't need to control your body, only your attention. Because whoever owns your attention owns your desire. And when they own your desire, they own you. Think about it. Every notification, every red bubble, every scroll, it's not random. It's a soft whisper saying, you're missing something. Someone is doing better. You could be more. And without even realizing, you start to measure your worth by comparison. You chase validation the way an addict chases a hit, not for joy, but for relief. The relief of feeling, just for a second, that you're enough. But here's the cruel part. That feeling is designed to vanish. The system doesn't want peace, it wants repetition. Your anxiety is not a glitch, it's the business model. We've built a civilization that worships freedom, but quietly trades it for stimulation. We say we want peace, but we check our phones 60 times a day. We say we want meaning, but we scroll through lives we'll never live. We've replaced reflection with reaction, depth with distraction. And every click is a silent agreement. I'll give you my attention if you give me the illusion of control. But you don't notice the trade, because control feels like choice, even when the options were pre-selected for you, even when what you want has already been planted in your head. That's the paradox of modern anxiety. You feel overwhelmed because you think you have too many choices, but the truth is, you have none that lead to peace. Soon you'll see why Epicurus called this confusion, the most dangerous form of pain, because it doesn't scream, it seduces. Epicurus said that the greatest wealth is to live without fear, but today, fear has become currency. Fear of missing out, fear of being invisible, fear of not having enough time to become the person you think you should be. And the more you fear, the more you consume. Ideas, identities, content, people. We don't even feel desire anymore. We scroll it. We refresh the feed, hoping to refresh ourselves. But the emptiness doesn't go away. It updates. Here's the hidden irony. You think you're making choices, what to buy, what to watch, what to want. But the algorithm already knows what you'll pick before you do. You're not choosing, you're being chosen. And maybe that's why modern anxiety feels so suffocating. Because deep down, you sense that your freedom has become a simulation. But that's not the end of the story, not yet. Because Epicurus didn't just diagnose the illness, he offered the cure. And it's nothing like the self-help slogans you've heard. What if peace isn't about escaping desire, but about redefining it? What if clarity, not control, is what truly liberates you? You'll see what that means in the next part. And trust me, this is where everything shifts. You've been taught that peace is something you find. Epicurus believed it's something you stop losing. Modern life tells you to keep adding more goals, more pleasure, more stimulation. Epicurus whispered the opposite, subtract, because what you remove determines what remains. He said the path to happiness isn't about denying desire, it's about refining it, about learning to want better, not more. So he made a simple practice. Before chasing anything, ask yourself 2 questions. Is this desire natural? Is it necessary? Most of your anxiety ends there, because once you identify the empty desires, the ones that feed on comparison, on image, on fear, you stop feeding them, and what isn't fed dies quietly. That's the beginning of peace. But here's the challenge. We don't actually fear not having. We fear not being seen having. And that's where Epicurus becomes radical. He invites you to detach not from the world, but from the performance of self, to stop chasing the version of you that only exists in other people's eyes. Because once you stop needing validation, you rediscover a strange and powerful silence, a silence that doesn't need to prove anything. That silence is freedom. And freedom, for Epicurus, was the truest pleasure of all. Now imagine this. You wake up tomorrow and your desires are cut in half. You'd still eat, still love, still create, but without the weight of chasing everything that never mattered. How would that feel? Lighter? Clearer? Maybe that's what peace was always meant to feel like. Not a high, but a homecoming. You don't have to renounce the world to find it. You just have to stop letting the world tell you what to want. Because the moment you stop measuring your worth by what you lack, you start living from what you already have. And that shift, from craving to clarity, is where anxiety ends. Epicurus called this ataraxia, a mind untouched by turmoil. Not because the world became easy, but because the noise inside finally lost its power. He didn't promise eternal happiness. He promised something more human, a life that feels enough. And maybe that's the art modern life forgot, needing less to feel more. But before we close this journey, there's one more truth Epicurus left behind, a truth about fear, death, and why we keep running even when we have everything we need. It's his most misunderstood and most liberating lesson.
Every philosophy has its core wound. For Epicurus, that wound was fear, the silent architect behind every craving, every distraction, every restless night. Because beneath all desires, one fear hides, the fear of ceasing to exist. Epicurus said, "Death is nothing to us, because when we exist, death is not present, and when death is present, we no longer exist." Simple words, but they carry a revolution. He meant that fear of death is not really fear of dying. It's fear of living without control. It's the terror of facing the limits of what we can own, change, or keep. And so we distract ourselves with endless wanting. We chase goals, pleasure, perfection, not because we need them, but because they give us the illusion that life is expanding, that we're not drifting toward the inevitable end. That's the hidden function of desire. It keeps mortality out of sight. But here's the twist, and maybe the hardest truth to face. The more you try to escape death, the less you actually live. Because every anxious thought, every comparison, every craving is just another way of postponing presence. You're alive, but you're not here. Epicurus wasn't trying to make you fearless. He was trying to make you awake. He wanted you to see that death gives life its shape. It's not the enemy of meaning, but its frame. Without limits, desire becomes chaos. Without mortality, there's no urgency to love, to create, to forgive. So when you stop fearing the end, you stop needing so much from the middle. And that's when anxiety finally loses its grip. Imagine if every desire you had was stripped of fear. You wouldn't rush. You wouldn't cling. You'd simply experience, fully, honestly, without demand. That's not detachment. That's intimacy with existence itself. It's what Epicurus called the wisdom of enough. He didn't say, stop desiring. He said, understand what your desire is running from. And once you face that shadow, once you look directly at the thing you were most afraid to see, you realize it never had power over you. That realization is peace, not a moment of joy, but the quiet ending of fear. Because when you stop fearing death, you stop fearing life. And that's where real freedom begins. But how do you live from that place in a world that feeds on distraction and fear? You've been told freedom is about doing whatever you want. But Epicurus would smile at that. A sad smile, maybe, because he knew that kind of freedom usually ends in chains. He believed real freedom begins when your wants stop owning you, when the endless hunger for more turns into a quiet appreciation of enough. That's where peace hides, not in the next achievement, not in the next purchase, not in the next person who promises to fill the emptiness, but in the space between one desire and the next. In that silence, you stop chasing and you start seeing. Because the truth is, you were never missing anything. You were just taught to believe you were. The system profits when you feel incomplete. But the moment you stop feeding that illusion, the moment you realize how little you actually need to feel whole, everything starts to collapse. The noise, the craving, the pressure to prove yourself. And what remains is simple, raw, human, free. Freedom for Epicurus wasn't rebellion, it was clarity. To know the difference between what you think you need and what you actually do, and to finally stop mistaking anxiety for ambition. So maybe, after all, pleasure isn't about indulgence, it's about independence. Not the kind that makes you powerful, but the kind that makes you peaceful. And if you ever forget that, just ask yourself one question. What if I already have everything I was looking for? Then, let the silence answer. If this moved something inside you, stay. We're building something for those who don't fake it. Subscribe, not just for the content, but for the confrontation. And if this left a wound, maybe it was meant to. Sometimes the best way to go deeper is to share the pain. Share it. We spend our lives chasing peace while running from the silence where it actually lives. We call it ambition, growth, progress. But sometimes it's just fear. Fear of finding out that enough was always right here. You don't need to own more. You need to want less. And when you finally do, the world stops owning you back. So maybe freedom isn't something you win. It's something you remember. And remembering, that's where healing begins.